Let's break down 3 running backs and 3 wide receivers who have sneaky upside moving into week 7 of 2024 fantasy football. These players either have great matchups that will present upside, are going under the radar, and are maybe out there on the waiver wire, maybe are on your bench, who I think need to be potentially in your starting lineups to help you dominate week 7. Let's kick the video off with Austin Ekeler of the Washington Commanders, who's averaging 11.6 fantasy points per game, 10.2 or more fantasy points in every single start so far on the season. He did miss week 4, but other than that, he's given you double digits in every single game on the year, sitting at the RB32 right now on the season. Brian Robinson Jr. has been dealing with that knee injury. He missed week 6. He may or may not play in week 7. Either way, I love Austin Ekeler this week going up against the Carolina Panthers, giving up the most fantasy points to the running back position so far on the season. I've been talking about this Washington Commanders backfield all week long, and I'm not going to stop. If Brian Robinson Jr. does play in this game, I think Austin Ekeler is a fantastic start. And if Brian Robinson Jr. does not play in this game, then yes, Austin Ekeler is an absolute smash start this week. We look at the last 3 weeks for the Carolina Panthers, the team allowing the most fantasy points to the running back position so far on the season. And we have seen touchdowns to not just RB1s, but also RB2s. Week 6, double-digit fantasy performances to both Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Week 5, double-digit fantasy performances to DeAndre Swift and Rashod Johnson. Week 4, double-digit fantasy performances to both Zach Moss and Chase Brown. There's no reason to bench Austin Ekeler this week. Is a fantastic flex play, and he might move up to RB1 territory if Brian Robinson Jr. misses the week. We can't ignore this matchup. Austin Ekeler has a ton of upside going into week 7. Next up is Alexander Mattison of the Raiders, who, I get it. Alexander Mattison feels a little gross, sits at 63% rostered still. I don't think anyone is still ready to trust Alexander Mattison, but he's averaging 11.8 fantasy points per game. He has double digits in every matchup on the season except for week 2 and week 4. And in week 2, he still scored a touchdown. He's the RB24 right now in fantasy football, coming off of his best fantasy performance of the season against a good Pittsburgh Steelers run defense with 17.5 fantasy points, 33 yards on the ground, a touchdown, and 5 receptions for 32 receiving yards. He also had a second touchdown called back in this matchup as well. Here on the road in week 7, he gets a great matchup against the LA Rams. This team has been awful against both the pass and the run so far on the year. And Mattison, if you are in need of a running back due to injury, due to bye weeks, whatever it may be, is going to have another solid day. I would say is a lock for double-digit fantasy points going into the week. Yes, I truly think it. I understand, guys. I've been saying it for weeks. I understand that it doesn't feel great to start Alexander Mattison, but I think at this point, when we start to look at some of these soft matchups like the Rams, we just can't ignore it. Mattison has been productive on the season. Can't take it away from him. I know that Zamir White missed last week, and he's practiced in limited capacity this week, and he might come back this week. He missed week 5 as well. That takes away some touches, but I'm not really worried about it because Zamir White has been extremely inefficient with the touches that he has gotten on the season so far. So I like Mattison a lot this week. I think he's a great value play. He might be out there on the waivers. If he's on your bench, you're in need of help at the running back position, he is a solid start here in week 7. All right, next up is Kimani Vidal of the LA Chargers, rookie running back who got his first start in week 6 against the Denver Broncos. Now, I'm a big J.K. Dobbins fan. This is J.K. Dobbins' backfield, but we know this is a run-first offense, and we saw a little spark out of Vidal, at least in the passing game. And, we look back weeks 1 through 4, right? This team was still giving a lot of involvement to Gus Edwards before he hit the IR. Gus Edwards had actually 29 rushing attempts between weeks 1 and 2, 3 rushing attempts in week 3, 6 in week 4, a little bit lower there. But ultimately, this team was wanting to utilize 2 running backs. And I think as the season goes on, as much as this is Dobbins' backfield, they probably, they want to be able to try and keep them fresh as they've already had their bye week and we have a long season left to go. They want to try and spell J.K. Dobbins at times. So who's it going to be? Is it going to be Hassan Haskins, who got 2 touches last week for 5 total yards? Or is it going to be Kimani Vidal, who only had 4 touches for 11 yards, is 2.75 yards per carry, but at least gives them a little bit of upside in the receiving game and had that receiving touchdown last week, 13.1 total fantasy points. I would bet on Kimani Vidal, who I think a lot of fantasy managers liked as a prospect going into the season, or as kind of like a sleeper or a late underdog draft pick, whatever. And I think Vidal can definitely start to carve out a role in this offense. So certainly plenty of risk. This is I need something because there's nothing out there. The waiver wire's thin, injuries, bye weeks, taking a little bit of a chance here, but it's a great matchup against the Cardinals. And I got my money on the Chargers on Monday night on the road against the Cardinals. And I think that either way, maybe the Cardinals do step up and look a little bit better offensively, but that'll keep the Chargers in this game and in need of points, and Vidal could be more involved that way. But if it's the opposite and the Chargers are up, then maybe they give more touches to Vidal and try and keep Dobbins off of the field. So a little bit of risk here. Kimani Vidal sits at 22% rostered. I think he could be a sneaky play here in week 7. Moving along, let's take a look at Rashod Bateman of the Baltimore Ravens, who made last week's video, finished with 11.1 fantasy points, 4 targets, 4 receptions, 71 receiving yards in that matchup against the Washington Commanders. Nothing crazy, but this was a player you were able to grab off the waiver wire, plug in, and he definitely could have helped you get through the week with double-digit fantasy points. He has double-digit fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 matchups, 2 touchdowns in 2 of his last 4 matchups. Just 18% rostered at the time I'm recording this, and another great game script here on Monday Night Football against the Buccaneers. This is a team that's going to allow for a good game script. The Ravens, for the most part, are allowing for good game scripts. We got 2 of the best offenses in the league. I think Bateman's going to be heavily involved again. Hasn't had a crazy season, averaging just 9.4 fantasy points per game, but he's definitely seen more involvement for the most part over the last 4 weeks. So Bateman, very sneaky, could be out there on the waiver wire and could be a huge help in what could turn into an offensive shootout this week. And like I said, could be a huge help for your fantasy roster, bye weeks, injuries, all that stuff. I think he could be a very sneaky flex as we approach week 7. And I really like Rashod Bateman's current receiving line on Underdog, sitting at 32.5 total receiving yards. He smashed that last week with 71 receiving yards, smashed it in week 5 with 58 receiving yards, and he actually hit that in weeks 1 and 2 as well, and barely missed it in week 3. So I would head straight to Underdog, take the over on Bateman's total receiving yards. And all new users who sign up with promo code THECATCH, that link is down below, are going to get a free NFL Pick'em from Underdog to use towards week 7. Take your free Pick'em, take the over on Bateman's receiving yards, and automatically triple your cash entry. On top of that, Underdog is going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 when you sign up with promo code THECATCH. That link is down below. All right, next player I want to talk about is Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots, and I really like Demario Douglas going into the week. Got that early game on Sunday, that London matchup, Patriots-Jaguars, 2 poor defenses, 2 questionable quarterbacks. We're going to see a lot of points in this game is my guess, and at the moment, whoever's playing the Jaguars, we want to try and start offensive starters against them. even if it's the Patriots. And the Patriots, their primary offensive starters for the most part, showed up in week 6 against the Texans. Drake May giving a little bit of life to this offensive passing attack for the Patriots. But even before Drake May became the starter in week 6, I had been talking about Demario Douglas in the last minute waiver wire videos as a guy to potentially target. And some of you guys were able to pick him up in week 5 before he did pop off last week in week 6 with 21.2 fantasy points, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 92 receiving yards, and a touchdown. But he still has had double-digit fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 matchups, 11.9 or more fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 matchups. So smash play this week, a guy that is still sitting at just 39% rostered, which kind of surprises me because if this passing attack is going to come to life a little bit with the Patriots and Drake May at quarterback, Douglas is looking like the wide receiver 1 on this team. I know we got other guys here like Jalen Polk. We saw Kayshon Boutte catch a touchdown. You got other names like Thornton and Bourne and whatever, but I think Douglas is the best wide receiver on this team. He's my favorite wide receiver on this team, and I think he's going to show up big against the Jaguars here in week 7. I think he's got plenty of sneaky upside as we approach the week. All right, last player that I want to mention is Quentin Johnston of the LA Chargers, coming off of 2 bad performances, 2.3 fantasy points in week 4, the bye week in week 5, then 5.2 fantasy points in week 6. But don't forget, he had 2 touchdowns in week 2 against the Panthers, 22.1 fantasy points, 12.4 fantasy points in week 3, and a touchdown in that matchup as well. Now, it's a great matchup this week on Monday Night Football against the Arizona Cardinals. This feels like one of those games where the Chargers can come out and either prove that they might really be a force to reckon with all season long, or maybe they do bend a little bit in this game and struggle against the Cardinals. But either way, if they're in a position where they need to throw the football, that's good. Or if they're in a position where they're coming out and they're putting up points, that's also good for Quentin Johnston. So I like him this week. This is a player who might be floating out there on the waiver wire, sitting at just 32% rostered, who you could potentially pick up, plug in, and give a little bit of flex upside to your roster. Now, he did suffer an ankle injury in that week 6 matchup against the Broncos, so we have to monitor that. Make sure that he plays this week. Make sure that he's active. There's no sneaky upside if he doesn't play this week, but overall, Quentin Johnston, a player who I still think has some good chemistry with Justin Herbert in the red zone. I know Ladd McConkey is the guy here more than likely, but Quentin Johnston I still think will have some moments in the season, and those moments are probably going to come in soft matchups like we're going to see here in week 7 against the Arizona Cardinals. So Quentin Johnston, maybe a little bit of risk with the injury involved, but overall also maybe a little bit of sneaky upside as we approach week 7. And that'll do it for today's video. There are 6 players who have some sneaky upside as we approach week 7. Don't forget, guys, I'm answering all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. If you guys need anything whatsoever moving into the week, drop me a comment and I'll get back to you guys before Sunday's games kick off. On top of that, we have everything you could possibly need to bring home a dub here in week 7 on the channel. So make sure you guys are checking out all the content, but more importantly, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on any of the content as the week goes on. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.